So we're going to tackle the concept of difficult dialogues, which at its heart is about belonging or not belonging. Some people have asked me, how did a white woman get involved for so many years in race relations and working in intercultural communication? And I don't want to tell the story except to give homage to my mentee mentors from the time I was a child up, both mentors of color and on occasion white mentors who have been there to educate, to teach me how to educate myself. And so I would not be in this work if it were not for the heroes in my life who are doing this work every day, even though they feel many times like the only one. My field is communication. And as I said earlier, we look at how people communicate. And if you look at the definition of communication, it comes from the Latin communis, which means to establish a community of meaning or a commonness of meaning. Now, a commonness of meaning is not the same as agreement. I can know what your meaning is, and you can know mine, and we can, in fact, be communicating. And it has little to do with whether we agree or not. And in fact, I would say it's absolutely critical, because the theme for this short talk comes from the quote by W.E.B. Du Bois. We're all in the environment, but we're in it in different ways. And the nature of that inness affects everything. You just saw that with a brief contemplation. Your inness where you felt like you belonged, and your inness when you felt you didn't belong. So trying to find a commonness of meaning. And in finding a commonness of meaning, trying to find a commonness, we often conflict. And conflict comes from conflictus, which means to strike together, right? To cause fire. And so we're going to look at how that works, because the way in which we communicate has been said to be the determinant for how the quality of our life. That the quality of our relationships determines the quality of our life, and the quality of our relationships is determined by the quality of our interactions. So the striking together, these difficult dialogues, will determine whether we go on to have a relationship with someone and what kind of relationship we have with them, or whether we don't. Some topics, all topics, can create difficult dialogues. And by a difficult dialogue, I mean a dialogue that scratches your soul. One that turns your belly inside out. One that makes your heart flip and affects how you feel. Immediately just swarms you and makes you agitated. Maybe you go into resistance, high alert level 3. But you are there, and it's not an idle conversation. And these kinds of topics can end up destroying relationships or can end up cultivating the truest of relationships. But they are messy. They are, by their definition, messy, because we are in the environment in such a different way. Race is one of those topics that this country has still yet to heal from, and has still yet to atone from, and it affects all our relationships when we come into contact with people that are perceived as racially, ethnically different. There are other topics as well that do that. All of the protected classes do that. Gender, sexual orientation, identity presentation, right? Ability, all of them do it. For right now, we're just going to focus in on race. All right? You ready to go there? It's a little red meat. It's a little vulnerable, but we're gonna go there. And this has really been near and dear to my heart. I mean, all my life, but this summer, with the summer of the slaughter, as I called it, our awareness of the African Americans who were profiled and killed because of it, and I lost 2 students two African Americans to suicide. So I study truth and reconciliation in South Africa. And I realized that as a country we have not worked with this issue in a way to deal with the global issue. We deal with the isolated incidences. We protest the isolated incidences. Nobody wants any of these to happen, right? But when we really look at what are the consequences, what's our karma as a country in terms of how we treat people of color, we have not yet really addressed that. And I can only be where I am, which is what effect does communication have on it? Our day-to-day, everyday moment of communication. And so that's what we're going to look at. You have with you a handout. We're going to get to know difficult dialogues a little bit more today. So you have a handout, and on the first page is research that came out of a mid-90s project that involved 8 universities of ethnic studies and intercultural faculty. And we looked at how do you encourage difficult dialogues across race, culture, gender, sexual orientation. How do you do that? And so we did it, and it's a lot of stories to tell you how we went through it. The funding agency wanted us to find out how to do it right. We never gave them that videotape. We gave them the videotape of how to work with what you have, which is sometimes difficult. Most of the time it's difficult and messy. So we did come up with, out of 8 semester-long videotapes, of what constitutes a difficult dialogue. That there are intense emotions. They come up. They spotlight who you are. You can be a counselor, you can be a PhD, you can have all this experience in whatever area you are in, but the minute this issue comes up, whatever the difficult topic is, but if it's race, your race matters. I am a white, middle-class, older woman, right? It's there. That I have a PhD in all of this, it doesn't matter. It's my lived experience. That's what is front and center. We get spotlighted in that way. And these dialogues can take different forms, and we know them well, right? They can explode into passionate anger, or an exchange, passionate exchange or anger, friendly intellectual debate, strongly worded disagreements, angry confrontations, personal attacks, attitude volleys, which is by and large what we see on the news, mild to mean, humor can also be used, brood in silence, or an exciting learning experience. If you were going to add to this list in your experience, what would you add? Are there any other forms you would add that a difficult dialogue can take? Judgment. Agreement never to talk about it. Code of silence. Exactly. Right. Indirect and hidden meanings, covert meanings, coded. We call them coded, right? They're speaking what a code means, right? All right. That's a bad neighborhood. Okay. Code. What else? Do you have another hand? Defensiveness. Very, very defensive. Mindlessness. Serious mindlessness. Blame. Invigorating. Can be invigorating. Denial. Right. Okay. Violence, exactly. So it can erupt in any number of different ways, and you are in it. You are in it in that way. So then we looked at why are these dialogues so difficult. You didn't do anything wrong that they erupted in one of these forms. You didn't even do anything wrong if you're the one that was wholly defensive, had an attitude volley, and maybe said something that you didn't want to say, that maybe you meant, but you didn't want it to come out that way. So we do this. You know, this happens. It's very human. We're just there. And we're too embedded with the race issue not to have it take these forms. All right, so why? Why? The first was, and we talked about this morning, Mina did a lovely job laying it out, in terms of fear. How much resistance is based on fear? Well, difficult dialogues are difficult because we're scared. We're really frightened of them. We're frightened about the embarrassment, the hostility, the discomfort. We're afraid of what we know, what we don't know. We're afraid that the other person's going to say something that really hurts us, that strikes at our heart and our soul. They're also difficult because we try to avoid them. And anytime you avoid it, it grows, right? It grows, it grows, it grows, it grows. And guise of politeness, making light of the topics, shifting topics, I think that's what you were getting at, simply ignoring the topic, bypassing it. The code of silence is probably the most devastating, because what doesn't get said is actually more important than what does get said a lot of times. And in communication and in psychology, they'll talk about the term as disconfirmation, that you want to talk about it and the other person doesn't, and you're being disconfirmed, you're being ignored, it's not being talked about, it's not allowed. And it's a reflection of the societal denial and cultural denial that we have, that these things actually exist, that white privilege actually exists. Right. I work really, really hard. How dare you say it? I benefited from privilege. I worked my way all the way through school. Right? I've been a single mother for all these years. Right? So we can say, don't tell me white privilege exists. I didn't get any benefits. Oh, really? So are wanting to deny that, right? Are wanting to deny that we've actually benefited if we're white. Race relations in the U.S. is both intensely intellectual and extremely emotional. It triggers these deep feelings. It is karmic. We have inherited it. Did we cause slavery? No. But we still have the consequences of 400 years of it. And so it is intensely emotional. And we still feel it. And we're still living it out. And it's intensely intellectual. You should go into any library or go online and see the number of scholars that have devoted their lives for hundreds of years, actually, to studying this issue. So it's very intellectual. It's studied. And it also involves institutionalized and unearned oppression and privilege. Those of us that benefit from the unearned oppression, the unearned privilege, those of us that benefit from it rarely see it. We just don't see it. You know, and I'm white. I've really studied being white. And I keep studying it, and I keep getting hit upside the head with that I'm blind, because I've been trained to be blind. And so it's hard. We have to be more mindful and vigilant to actually see it. We have to study it and understand it. And we have to be willing to be called on it. And those that don't benefit from oppression see it clearly. They see it so clearly. In my class every term, I'll do what's a fishbowl. And they've done all the reading on white privilege and all of that. And we get the students that want to participate, a small group of white students in the center and some students of color on the outside. And the white students will talk about how they never knew they had white privilege, and they were stunned at the readings. And so they talk about that. And it's an eye-opener for them. It's a moment of this experience, this intellectual and emotional experience. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, this has been going on for 400 years. It's still going on. Look at the evidence. Look at the data. Look at, right. And the students of color, when they're allowed to ask questions, after they've heard enough, they go, really? I mean, very genuinely. It's like, really? And then this interesting conversation happens when the students of color get in the center and the white students go on this outside, of just how they were taught from the times they were students, from the times they were kids, about white privilege, and what they couldn't do because they didn't have it. And so, and then other conversations come up, fascinating conversations. But the one that happens year after year after year is that the white privilege, and this is in the Bay Area. This is in the East Bay, right? So this isn't to make us feel ashamed. This is to say, in fact, whoa, this is big. That we are this, that this is hard for us is true. And it's hard for the European Americans to come to grips with it. Those of us time and time again, and it's hard for the people of color we come in contact with because they see that we don't know. So this means that there's a heightened awareness of our vulnerability, that we really know we are vulnerable in these dialogues. We really do. So if we go in there not knowing what we don't know, or knowing what the other person doesn't know, but knowing we might be hurt by it, or knowing that we really care and we have really good intentions, knowing that we really want to be part of the solution, knowing that we really want to help, but knowing that we're risking a lot. No matter what our ethnicity is, we're risking a lot. So why should we try to go there? Why should we try to have a dialogue about race, across race lines? Why should we try to do that? Or across gender or sexual orientation or gender identity lines? Why should we try to do this? For our own health. Say more. Mm-hmm. What happens to our body? Everything becomes heart rate goes up. We start getting angry. We're feeling misunderstood. We're feeling vulnerable. All of those things cause the body to respond in a certain way. We harbor this memory, this energy. Our cells have memory. As a result, this is what causes our health diseases and all of these other things over a lifetime. So physically, to me, it makes sense to do it for our own physical health. So the political is personal, and the personal is political, and our health is affected by this container that we didn't ask to be put in, but we're here. But we're here together, yeah. And our physical health matters, our spiritual health, yeah. Why else should we? Another way of putting it that speaks to you? Yeah.
I think it's just, you know, and I think, yeah, no, I mean, like, I don't think anyone, like, wants to be an oppressor, you know?
Right.
Yeah, and not knowing how you're hurting people is horrible.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
It's horrible. It's horrible, right.
There are a couple of things I'd have to respond with. I think everyone here coming together, understanding the healing potential of mindfulness. That what we're trying to do when we engage students is address the different symptoms of oppression. Mm-hmm. And unless we call out what that oppression actually is, right, we're not actually able to fully address the roots of it. I think that's really important. Also, I think as a person who comes from an ethnic background of people who have benefited from a system of oppression, something that speaking truth to that it does for me is allows me to reclaim my humanity. And I think in that way, it's very important to have those conversations.
Thank you. Another response of why we should do this? Another way of putting it, Shay?
Yeah, just to cultivate love and break down barriers. Yeah.
Over here.
I was just going to add quickly that our liberation is bound together, and we all lose out.
That's right. Last one. Yeah.
So I know a lot of us might agree with this, but I think that all human beings at their core want to be seen and understood.
That's right.
And if we really want that for ourselves, we have to be able to give it to others. If you think about it, if everyone stays closed off and isn't willing to engage in some kind of debate or conversation, then we never learn anything. So compassion can't exist.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we do it quickly so we can, yeah.
Sure. I just
It's really crazy making. Thank you. That's really so true. Yeah. Bob, you had your hand up quickly. Yeah.
Well, I don't know how much numbers have changed, but in the height of my teaching career, 85% of the teachers in California were white, and across where more than half the students were not. So, as Lisa Delpit says, we're teaching other people's children. How well do we even know ourselves?
Right.
You know, and as you said, whiteness has the privilege of being more blind.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that's important to know.
That reminds me of a situation where I was teaching the teaching class, teaching graduate students how to be teachers in college. And I led them through a mindfulness and perspective taking about what they knew about the students. And we looked at the demographics of the students. And, you know, who can you most read in a classroom? Whose expressions are you most comfortable feeling like you know what they're feeling? Who do you have a sense of where they live or what they might have grown up with? What's the base of your knowledge? So I led them through this visualization, and at the end, this one very thoughtful European American young man who was well on his way to be an insurance broker but still thought he wanted to teach. He just had this glazed, dazed look on his face, and I said, Steve, how you doing? He said, if I were to know what I need to know in the classroom, I would have to change everything about my life. I said, what do you mean? He said, I'd have to move to a different neighborhood. I'd have to give my children different experiences. I would have to change where I work. I live in a completely white environment in San Ramon. Or Danville, I forgot one of them. And I just let him sit with that. Because it was powerful for me that he had actually taken that perspective and seen the magnitude of what it meant to not know about your students, to really not know. And so.
Well, not knowing about your students begins with not knowing about yourself.
Not knowing what you don't know,
Cultural
right,
humility
right.
is one word that's being
Yeah, that's a really important piece of what does it mean to be white, and what does it mean about your own lived experiences. Asante has a wonderful quote, the arrogance of not knowing what you don't know but thinking everyone needs to know what you do. And so it's with that I would say bringing mindful inquiry is the most important, of asking yourself and asking ourselves time and again, what don't we know, and what kind of question might we ask. On the back of this page is kind of the basic process that I use just for a resource. As with Mina, we're just giving you resources that we use and running you through some exercises that you trust you will adapt to your own style and your own needs. But to explain to students what we're doing in intercultural relations, I give them just this simple little way in which our mind works. And that we start out quite open and we initially just notice differences without judgment, then we go into basic generalizations. Again, they're still pretty malleable. But the minute we move down into stereotypes, we begin the othering and then the ethnocentrism, and then from there we move down into the prejudice, the discrimination, and the oppression. Whether it's oppression of ideas at a meeting, we don't call on somebody at a meeting, we don't have different voices at an important event, right? But at any point, mindfulness can put us back into openness. And so it's not like these are the bads, it's like this is the human way the mind works, just as Amy was saying with the young girls, you know, figuring out what they wanted to do the weekend and not wanting to be there. Our mind accidentally goes there. Think of the times you stereotype on the freeway. I mean, maybe just like that, but then you catch yourself, right? But we go there. So at any moment, the inquiry can, the mindfulness and the inquiry can bring us back to openness. And that's the way that I work with the students and with myself, is to to just ask, what don't I know in this moment? What don't I know in this moment? And in what ways can I bring myself more open? And what ways can I open up to that? But as Pema Chodron said, finding the questions to your answers. Right? Finding the questions to your answers. So staying in the difficult dialogue, and what I could stay here for an hour and regale you with embarrassing, humiliating, difficult dialogues I've had in this work. and times that I have just gone home and just wanted to curl up and feel like a worthless pig. And that's the work, actually, is to come back from not judging yourself, but keep hold of that cultural humility, keep hold of the personal humility, that you're willing to stay in it, and you're willing to learn from every dialogue, and you're willing to get involved and come back if it's really messy, and just actually start having some humor about it. But just to figure out what do you need for your own health in these dialogues. If having difficult dialogues in our society is absolutely necessary for us to move forward, what is it that you need? What is it that keeps you in the dialogue? How can you stay there, or how can you come back in a way that contributes to your well-being and to that of others? So that's the question I'd like to leave you with. And let's see where we are. I know we're trying to make ally our time. Okay, are there any questions before we move into an important exercise that's gonna up the ante a little bit? But any questions? Yeah.
Recently, I had a middle school student tell me that people are racist towards Mexicans. Made me feel like, I just want to say, oh, it's institutionalized. You are awesome. Love yourself. Mexicans are awesome. You know, and I didn't know. I haven't been trained on how to address racial issues with kids. You know, I know how to talk about it on an adult level, but how do you deal with that in school?
Well, I'm going to let some of the people that are really working with the younger kids, because I work with the college students, so I'm in the same situation you're in. Did you want to respond briefly?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of tools out there. Some of them are on the resource list that Leslie's going to hand to you, but Teaching Tolerance, if any of you have heard of it, has a great anti-bias teaching framework. And then there's also the Culturally Responsive Teaching, CRT, but I like to call it culturally respectful instead of culturally responsive. Those are a couple resources out there, and I'd be happy to also be a thought partner with you. Yeah.
Any other question or offering you want to make at this point before we transition?
Just that you said to notice how we stereotype even occasionally on the freeway. But actually, if we really noticed, when we're walking down the street, we make snap judgments about all kinds of things, almost everybody who walks by. And that's really fine-tuning ourselves, I think. It's horrific, actually. And it has to do with race, gender, all kinds of things. But and even if we've worked on ourselves with all of those, if you really kind of do that sort of mindful walking, you drop into a level of subtlety about it that is sometimes just like, don't like. You know, if we just even look at what our body like opens to or doesn't open to. And so I think there's something about really accommodating that that's what we do as human beings, at the same time really allowing ourselves to feel it and let our heart be broken by it.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's an important piece, that we go down to the bottom, right down to oppression, our subtle versions of it, very quickly. Shay.
What do you personally do to deal with the events that come up with you, like I guess like triggers or things that students may cause that are yeah, just
Oh, in
painful
the
for you.
classroom when
In
they
the
say
classroom.
something that's hurtful to the whole group, or that triggers
Oh,
me personally.
triggers you personally. Like, how do
Ah.
you?
Right. Yeah, it's. I have to say, it's white students that trigger me the most. You know, and I have worked really hard to understand whiteness and the experience of whiteness and my own experience of whiteness, and to try to be gentle, but to recognize it, that my reaction to them is also my reaction to me and my reaction to a bigger group. So I try to notice that in the moment. You've been in class with me, Ma's been in class with me. You know, you can probably say what I look like when the students say the things. Inside, I'm going, do I say something here in class? Do I just let it go? Is this because I feel very protective of the students of color in class, I do, but I don't necessarily need to, but so I don't want anyone hurting anybody. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I try to really notice it and pay attention to it and address it by myself. Yeah.
One of the things that I've learned is with Buddhist teachings, it talks about being in the now. Wherever our mind takes us is in the past or the future. It has nothing to do with the here and the now. And so when something is triggered, it's from our past. This interaction has nothing to do with that. So it's a matter of becoming more aware of what words and what context trips those triggers, and observing it, acknowledging it, embracing it. It's a part of who we are.
Right.
It just is.
Right.
So how do I take that, put it in neutral, and look at the facts for what they are right now? That individual, if they said something and I received it and interpreted it as hurtful,
Right.
I can promise you they didn't mean to be that way in a classroom. They're just expressing their own
Right.
lack of knowledge and their own fears as well.
Right.
So I try to look at the trigger, really observe everything it's causing physically and mentally, and then after that, it all changes. Things just dissipate as you start observing it. And so when you bring yourself back into the now, you realize the dynamics of this current situation is quite different. So
Yeah.
that's how I deal
Well,
with it.
thank you. Thank you for that offering.